Amazing.
Hello everybody, how y'all doing?
Howdy.
Howdy.
How you doing?
Good.
Howdy.
I'm Ben Fry, I'm the president of the Psi Chi. I also help, which is the International Honor Society of Psychology. I also help run APS, which is the Association of Psychology Students. And I'm also the chair of the Secular Student Alliance. All three organizations have come together to help bring Dr. Andy Thomson here. With the help of the National Secular Student Alliance, they've given us a project grant to bring him here. So thanks to them. Tonight he's going to be talking about the psychology of religion. He's got some new stuff that he has added, hopefully, to his original works. I don't know if everyone knows about Dr. Thomson. He's from Charlottesville. He has a private practice in psychiatry there. He also works heavily with UPA. And he's also a trustee on the Richard Dawkins Foundation Board. So, without further ado.
Are the dogmas of religion, as distinguished from moral principles. All mankind, from the beginning of the world to the present day, have been fighting, quarreling, burning, and torturing one another over abstractions unintelligible to themselves and to all others, and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words in 1860. And the essence of my talk tonight is this. Should you run into Mr. Jefferson next week, you can say to him, "No, Mr. President, religious ideas are no longer beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Not only that, we actually have before us the foundations of a comprehensive psychological science of religious belief. We now know why human minds create and consume religious ideas, why we are all vulnerable to generate supernatural beliefs, be vulnerable to believing. And also, Mr. President, it is because at the time that you wrote those words in 1860, there was a 7-year-old boy in England who would grow up to transform our understanding of all life on Earth, all plant and animal life on Earth, Charles Darwin. But his ideas would also transform our understanding of the human mind, the architecture of the human mind. And in that architecture lay buried the reasons that we generate religious beliefs. And Darwin was a genius, and few people appreciated, even at the time that he wrote The Origin of the Species, he could see the implication of his ideas for humans and human psychology. And what I'm going to do this evening is the following. Let me give you a roadmap. This is my chance at you, so I'm going to give you a lot. Hold on to your seats, because we're going to go for, I hope, an enjoyable ride tonight. And here's the map. We're going to start with the modern Darwinian synthesis, its relevance to religious ideas. A little bit of evolution and human evolution, its relevance to religious beliefs. Then we're going to look at some of these psychological mechanisms, the main cognitive mechanisms that generate religious belief. And then we're going to end talking about ritual, the neurobiology of ritual, which is probably the most powerful aspect of religion. Before I do that, there are a number of people I want to thank. Ben, where are you? Ben Fry, the secular students here at ODU for inviting me, a national organization. I also would not be here were it not for Richard Dawkins and Dr. Elizabeth Cornwell, the executive director of the Dawkins Foundation. It's been one of the great privileges of my life to work with the foundation. Also, my co-author, Claire Aquifer, some of the ideas you hear tonight are hers. And thank you all for coming on a Monday night. So here we go. Darwin's, oh, I forgot to punch that slide. You can see in The Origin of the Species, Darwin understood the implication of his ideas. You know, it took 130 years for us to see it fully. So here we go. Darwin's idea, remarkably simple. all species, there's heritable variation. The variations that promote survival and particularly reproductive success become instantiated in the organism. This is a photo of Watson and Crick at the time that they mapped out the double helix of DNA. What do you get if you combine Darwin's idea and genetics? What do you get if you combine Charles Darwin and Watson and Crick? Anybody know? This is what you get. In the modern Darwinian synthesis, which is still, if you've not read it, I encourage you, look at Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. One other thing I forgot to say. As I go through the talk tonight, get out some pencil and paper or the pads on your iPad or iPhones. I'm going to try to give you some suggestions of things that I think you will enjoy reading. Most of your students have to do a lot of reading. These are things that are brief and I think enjoyable. And I'm going to intersperse my talk with some suggestions that I think to follow up on some of the ideas, things that you will enjoy. And this is the modern Darwinian synthesis. And this is a nice summary of it. And my bias is that you shouldn't be allowed to graduate from high school and consider yourself educated if you don't know this. All organisms, all life on Earth, integrated collections of problem-solving devices, adaptations designed by natural selection over evolutionary time to promote in some specific way the survival and reproduction of the genes that built those adaptations. So, my heart solves the problem of pumping blood. Hemoglobin solves the problem of transporting the oxygen. My lungs solve the problem of extracting the oxygen from the air. At every single level of biological inquiry, from membranes to minds, Darwinian natural selection. Now, the reason this statement is up here, and another reason it's important, is because this is also a description of the human mind. The mind is what the brain does, and the mind-brain is this integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations, designed over evolutionary time by natural selection to promote the survival of the genes that built those adaptations. So, you're sitting there looking at me, I'm an upside-down image on your retina. Myriad adaptations convert that into the three-dimensional view that you have right now. And what we're going to be talking about tonight are largely social adaptations, cognitive social adaptations. They are the building blocks of religion. You don't know it, but you are also monitoring my face, my eye gaze, the tone of my voice, and making assumptions about my intentions, my wishes, my beliefs, my desires, my character structure, my personality. You've got very specific adaptations that are generating those impressions, most of which remain unconscious to you. So a way of thinking about the human mind, it's like the Apollo spacecraft. What's the Apollo spacecraft? It's this complex array of engineering devices that are solving a constant stream of problems, only a few of which are actually conscious to the astronauts. And it is those social adaptations that we're going to be talking about that are the building blocks of religion. That's the modern Darwinian synthesis. Now, let's look at human evolution. And again, my bias is that you should not be able to graduate from high school and consider yourself educated if you don't know the basics that I'm about to go over. The bottom line is that we are risen apes, not fallen angels. When somebody asks you where you're from, you want to say Africa. Darwin knew that, even at the time that he wrote The Origin of the Species. The great uninvited guest at that banquet was humans, and he knew that probably our ancestors were in Africa and that we were closely related to the great apes of Africa. He finally stated it in 1871 in The Descent of Man. And again, as most of you probably know, we share 98.4% of our DNA with chimps and bonobos, our closest cousins. And some of that is noise. This is where you're from. Africa has our bones, Africa is in our blood. We are all Africans. And we come from an area of Africa, this pointer doesn't seem to be working, but the Great Rift Valley. Basically, Somalia to Mozambique. You want to think of that as the birth canal of the human species. Now, I want to give you a brief overview of life, and again, its relevance to our topic tonight, which is religion. Imagine that this is all of life, 4 billion years. This is the beginning of life here. This is the present day. So my arm span is 4 billion years. Life begins here, replicating molecule, probably somewhat like RNA. All of us on chromosome 1 carry the descendant of that original replicating molecule. It still blows me away when I think about it. You are carrying the descendant of the original replicating molecule for maybe 4 billion years old. Then life is bacteria, basically, unicellular organisms, and Luca is the last universal common ancestor with all of life, all eukaryotic life. We carry about 100 genes from Luca. So life is unicellular organisms, bacteria, billions of years to evolve the extraordinary machinery of the cell, which we're still mapping out. About here, 1 billion years ago, cells get together. Think flatworms, the origin of central nervous systems. About 800 million years ago, the original monoamine neurotransmitter, serotonin. Why is this important? Serotonin, as some of you may realize, is what we boost with antidepressants. You're sitting there quietly, your serotonin neurons are going about 3 cycles a second. I'm up here moving around, mine are going about 5 cycles a second. Serotonin regulates self-esteem, among other things. It also regulates outward focus as opposed to inward focus. As you'll hear, this is one of the neurotransmitters that's boosted by religious ritual. Also, shortly afterwards, dopamine, norepinephrine, as I'll show you later, also important. Oxytocin, endorphins, all present in central nervous systems of animals, crucial to understanding the neurobiology of religious ritual. So, dinosaurs show up about here, middle of my hand. Then, probably the asteroid hits the Earth, dinosaurs are wiped out, mammals start to flourish. And next time you go to your family practitioner and you ask for your family history, give him this. And this is the crux of my last digit of my finger. 65 million years ago, this is your most immediate family history, your primate, monkey, ape family history. Why is this important? Because we moved from animals that had eyes on the side of their head to eyes in front, binocular vision. Okay, if I have binocular vision, I need somebody to watch my back. The origin of group living, group primate living, and the attachment system. Attachment system, probably 30, 40 million years old. One of the crucial systems upon which religious beliefs are built. 35, 40 million years old. Attachment system in there. Then what I'd like you to do is look at that, the little line that goes between our common ancestor and humans. Everybody see that little line on the U between chimpanzees and bonobos, and the line between the common ancestor and humans. So if your family practitioner doesn't like this and says, no, I want your immediate family history, then you show them this. And this is, the common ancestor with chimps is here. This is what we now know about the hominid line. Your most immediate family history, Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, Lucy. And then if the family practitioner says, no, come on, I want your immediate family history, then you give them this. This is the genus Homo, 2 million years old. And what's important here is that Homo erectus left Africa maybe 1.5 million years ago, got as far as China, Indonesia, probably were the ancestors of the tiny dwarf species on the island of Florensis. Homo erectus in Africa evolved into Homo heidelbergensis. A group of Homo heidelbergensis goes into Europe, become the Neanderthals. The other group of Homo heidelbergensis, about 500,000 years ago, that remains in Africa, evolves into our lineage, Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, you and I, modern anatomical Homo sapiens evolved in Africa maybe 200,000 years ago. There is tremendous climate shifts probably around 100 or 70,000 years ago. It is thought that our species got down to between 600 and 2,000 breeding individuals, and we survived dramatic climate change and made it out of that. We came very close to extinction. Language may have evolved, they think, 70,000 years ago, and we leave Africa 50, 60,000 years ago. And I will show you later the closest relatives to that ancestral population that we now have. Concise, Andaman Islanders, Aborigines, all have the same religion. It's a window into deep time and maybe the original religion. So we leave Africa, and this is what until recently, very recently, was thought to be the map. We went into Europe. Somewhere when we were going into, while we were going to Europe, there was some breeding event. We mated with Neanderthals briefly. We ultimately wiped them out, go across the Bering Strait, come into the Americas. Here's where it gets complicated. In a cave in Siberia, they found tiny fossils, but they were able to get the genome. And it was a genome of a heretofore unknown species, the Denisovans. This cave was occupied by Neanderthal, Homo sapiens, and these Denisovans. So we have tiny fossils, we have their genome. And this is the most recent summary of the genetic evidence. And so Africans still have a small percentage from archaic Homo in their genome. All Eurasians and Americans have 2.5% Neanderthal, probably. Again, the legacy of that mating event when we came out of Africa. So the idea that we are a special chosen species, we are actually a hybrid species. I'm part Neanderthal. My wife could have told you that years ago. And then the group that went into Australia and Indonesia mated with the Denisovans, and they have Denisovan DNA, which turns out to be very helpful to the immune system. So the idea that we're somehow, God's chosen people, a special species, it turns out we are actually a hybrid species, a very interesting hybrid species. Now, as I said, until recently we had this notion that we had come across the Bering Strait. And for those of you here in Norfolk, this might be of particular interest because there is now solid evidence, 6 different sites, that actually people from the Sautrian population in France colonized the eastern half of the United States 20,000 years ago, 18,000 years before the birth of Christ. And one of the sites is actually out here in the Chesapeake Bay. A scallop trawler pulled up a flint and a mastodon skull, and the flint originates here. Wow. Anybody from near the Nottoway River in Richmond? Up by Richmond, the Nottoway River at Cactus Hill, there is one of the 6 sites, 20,000 years ago. So modern, anatomically modern human beings, you and I, were here on the eastern part of the United States 20,000 years ago. If you're interested in this, Google Across Atlantic Ice. That's the book that just came out about this. The reviews summarize it nicely. The book is very technical, but very beautifully done, interesting to look at. But the reviews will give you some of the interesting information. So, bottom line is this, that every one of the 7 billion people alive on the earth today, all 7 billion of us, are the sons and daughters of a small band of somewhere between 600 and 2,000 individuals that arose in Africa 50, 60,000 years ago. So put aside your racial, ethnic, religious differences. Underneath our skins, we are all Africans. These are the Concise, we're going to talk more about later, one of the groups closest probably to our ancestors. This is here because I want you to look at the change in brain size. In evolutionary time, this is very fast. and look particularly in the areas of the front of the skull, the frontal lobes. And this shows it a little bit better, a Homo erectus skull, one of our skulls. And notice particularly that area of the frontal lobes. It's a very rapid brain evolution. Why? What explains that dramatic change in brain size, particularly in the frontal lobes? Our Homo erectus ancestors had conquered the physical environment. They had left Africa. So what would be the greatest environmental selection pressure driving that evolution of big brains, particularly the frontal lobes? Anyone want to guess?
Social interaction.
I'm sorry?
Social
Right,
interaction.
exactly. The most challenging, difficult part of our environment for the last part of our evolution was probably each other. And this is important because religious ideas, religious beliefs come from these social cognitions. And that all religious ideas are the extraordinary use of everyday social cognitions, which I think even the ordinary ones are extraordinary. But religious ideas are all extraordinary uses of these social cognitions which evolved originally for other purposes. It's a byproduct. So religion is a byproduct of mechanisms that evolve for other reasons. And a lot of people say, well, wait a second, byproduct sounds kind of weak. How could something so powerful as religion be a weak byproduct? You don't want to think of the word byproduct as weak. Reading and writing is a cultural creation. It too is a cultural byproduct of mechanisms that evolved originally for other purposes. Fine motor skills, vision, language, those are the biological adaptations which come together to create the very, very powerful cultural creation of reading and writing. Similarly, religion is a cultural byproduct of mechanisms that evolved originally for other purposes. How many of you here at times crave a Big Mac meal? Like, come on. Okay, how many of you crave a juicy steak at times? How many of you, if it's 3 a.m. and there's a brownie downstairs, you just can't leave it alone? Of course. All right. Now, why? And what I want to show you is that if you understand the psychology of junk food, you understand the psychology of religion. And why do I say this? Because what is junk food? Junk food arises from particular adaptations, then comes back at us in a novel form that creates a supernormal stimulus. We all have cravings for fat, but the original craving was lean game meat. Now we have these super fat hamburgers that really fire up our pleasure centers and the dopamine centers in our brain. All of us crave sweets because sweets were crucial sources of vitamin C and calories, as was fat meat. These are crucial for survival. None of us crave broccoli because tubers were widely available. We have adaptations for cravings for things that were crucial but rare, sweets and fats. But the original craving for sweets was fruit. Okay? And junk food comes from that adaptation, but then comes back at us with Coca-Cola, with brownies, which are supernormal stimulus and just really light up our dopamine parts of our brain. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I'll eat a brownie before peach any day. And this is the reason. And so why I say this is because if you understand the psychology of junk food, it's the same thing with religion. And here's just one example. What does a 2-year-old do when it's distressed? Right. It comes over to you and does what? Pick me up. Lifts its hands up, pick me up. And what do? You pay attention to it, you go over, you pick up that child and you hug it. That's the attachment system. The basic attachment system, the caregiving system. And religion hijacks that. It gives us supernormal caretakers, parents with greater power than our frail, very mean parents have. And so here you see in Pentecostal worshipers a direct expression of that basic attachment system, reaching up to a parent. So, and as I'll show you, the rest of the many of the rest of the religious mechanisms are ordinary mechanisms that then in religious ideas come back to us and create this super normal stimulus. So I promised you that I'd give you the definition, show you that junk food, the psychology of junk food was like religion. I hope you understood that. Those are the basics. Now, let's look at some of the particulars. And what we're going to do is a little kind of anatomy here. We're going to tease apart some of these mechanisms. These, I think, are some of the most important. And an easy mnemonic for this is damn it, or damn MIT, if you're an engineer. But decoupled cognition, attachment system, hyperactive agency detection, minimally counterintuitive worlds, which it's not an adaptation per se, but utilizes our desire for novelty, moral inferential systems, intentionality with an S, and theory of mind. I think those are the big ones, and I'll show you some about each one of these. These are some of the others that we know are crucial. And just as I was talking about vision, vision has myriad adaptations, and you experience sort of a seamless product of it. And religion is the same way. Religion is based on all these mechanisms, and if you're religious and have religious belief, it's a seamless compilation, and what we're going to do is try to tease some of that apart right now. Let's start with decoupled cognition. Fancy word for the following. Remember when I started, I talked to you and said, if you saw Mr. Jefferson next week, and most of you right now could imagine, in a sense, running into Mr. Jefferson. It would be very easy to do. That's clearly impossible, but you could very easily do it. This is something that we take for granted, but it's extraordinary. I will guarantee you that as I have been talking, everyone in this room has thought about a conversation that they're going to have with somebody later this evening, or tomorrow, or sometime this week, something that they're worried about. You've been paying attention to me, but you've been thinking, you know, I need to talk to so-and-so about such and such. And you can decouple in time and place and imagine a complex social interaction with an unseen other. It's crucial to memory, it's crucial to planning, and we just take it for granted. But it is pretty extraordinary. It's probably one of the things that's involved in human uniqueness, this capacity for decoupled cognition. Right now, I could ask all of you to imagine a conversation with President Obama and ask him for something and hope that he will give it to you in return. I can imagine a conversation where I ask him to do more about health care, and he says, yes, if I'll do such and such for him. And you can see just in that little thing, an appeal to an authority figure, reciprocity, a request, a return, and an unseen other. I'm getting to the age where many of those near and dear to me have died, and I still catch myself talking to them. How many of you catch yourself talking to those that are no longer with us? Sure. Okay. And as you can see, it's just one little step to ancestor worship. And this illustrates one of the basics. As strange as religious ideas may seem to you at times, they are actually just one small step from everyday, ordinary human cognition. Now, the second part of this is anatomical, the decoupled cognition that goes between mind and brain. And I'm going to do a little surgery here to illustrate this. Imagine that this is your brain, right? Or I guess your brain with a knife in it. We're going to look at half a brain. So, for those of you who are familiar with this kind of thing, what we're showing is the medial side of the brain, and particularly the frontal lobes. And in the medial part of your frontal lobes is where you perceive non-physical attributes. So you are perceiving my wishes, desires, intentions, thoughts. You are thinking about your own wishes, desires, thoughts along this line, non-physical attributes of yourself and others in this area. Whereas with regards to your own body and my body, you are processing or perceiving my body and your own body in the lateral parts, the lateral cortex. So I hope you start to see that there is a, built into the very architecture of our brain, is this split. The mind and body are represented in completely different networks in our brain. It's the default setting of the human mind. And if you think about this, that's crucial, because if I had to have Ben in front of me to think about what's going on in his mind, I'd be in real trouble. But this allows me to think about minds separate from bodies. It's the default setting of the brain. You know, we can think about minds in the future, in the present, in the past, separate from their bodies. It's the default setting, and so you can see that the idea of souls, the notion of souls that live on, is just one small step. And as we'll talk about it, your ideas about what's going on in my mind, your theory of mind mechanisms, basically never shut down. So that's why you can imagine what's going on in somebody's mind who's not only here, but you know, if we're talking about a conversation with President Jefferson, you know, it's like his mind is still alive. Those mechanisms never shut down. We can't perceive of Jefferson's mind actually dead. Now, let's look at the attachment system. And this is particularly close to my heart because Mary Ames' work was at UVA. And she and psychiatrist John Bowlby mapped out the attachment system in humans. And this is the basic mammalian caretaking system between parent and offspring. And there's a haunting story in Alan Walker's work about the Nakatomi boy, the 1.8 million-year-old, almost complete Homo erectus skeleton that they found. And it's a great book. Look at it, The Wisdom of the Bones. But they also found the skeleton of a Homo erectus woman, 1.6 million years of age, and they realized that she had died of vitamin A poisoning, which is a terrible way to die. You hemorrhage into your joints, it's incredibly painful, it's just an awful way to die. They looked at the fossil and they realized, wait a second, it's also calcified. And it hit them. This woman had lived for months, probably unable to move and in great pain. It meant that people were taking care of her in the long, dark nights on the savannah, the attachment system, in our most distant Homo ancestors. Now, the attachment system is crucial for religion. You know, we have attachment to a god or gods who are parent-like figures who are going to take care of us better than our regular parents. But it is also the attachment system that is crucial in understanding why people have difficulty leaving religion. And you see this in its most clear form actually in the life of Charles Darwin. Darwin, as you know, went on the voyage of the Beagle, 1831 to 1836. He went as a creationist, and he returned to England in October of 1836, and he gave his bird collection to an ornithologist, John Gould, and these were birds that he thought were wrens and meadowlarks, and he had already had some sense that the idea that species were created by God in a fixed way, special creation, species were immutable through time, he at some level was already questioning that. But in the spring of 1837, Gould comes back to him and says, you know, these aren't wrens and meadowlarks. These are species not previously known. There are 13 finch species that are unknown to science, completely separate species. There were a couple of meadowlark species, maybe 3 or 4, unknown to science. And it hit Darwin in the spring of 1837 that species were not immutable, and that these were birds that probably came from South America to the Galapagos and over millions of years had adapted to their environments. And there had been adaptive radiation and separate species had emerged. This is the spring of 1837. He is 28 years old. And he opens his famous notebook. This is his original Tree of Life. And he realizes that we too are evolved animals. And so species have changed over time, including us. You know, that we have evolutionary origins. So species had changed, but what was the mechanism? And he didn't have a mechanism. And then in the fall of 1838, he becomes engaged to his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, who is very religious. In September of 1838, he reads Malthus's essay on population. And Malthus states that populations grow exponentially, there's not enough food, there's massive death, the strongest survive, there's a constant struggle for existence. Darwin has his mechanism. In the fall of 1838, Darwin had figured it out. He is 29 years of age. And he tells his fiancée, and she is very distressed. This is one of her letters to him that survives. They are married in January of 1839, and in February of 1839, she writes this to him, the top part. A year before Darwin dies, he writes his autobiography. He had carried that letter with him his whole life. He pulls out the letter, and on the bottom, he writes the following. And it was a huge source of stress between them. And he sat on his great idea for probably over 20 years, in part because of the distress he knew it would cause his wife when it was published. And if you know Darwin's life, his mother died when he was 7. Emma was very much not just a wife, but a caretaker and a mother to him. And by the 1840s and 1850s, on Sunday morning, Darwin and his wife and his children would walk to church. Emma and the children would go into the church. Darwin would just keep on walking. And it took Wallace coming up with the same idea to push Darwin to publish. One of the main reasons he had sat on his idea was because of the distress that would cause the major attachment figure in his life, Emma, who was desperate to want to believe because she wanted to be reunited with her family after death. This, I think, is one of the best statements of it. Carl Giberson, the Nazarene physicist who's trying to make evolution and Christianity come together, I think it's a very explicit statement. If he gives up his religious belief, he loses the crucial attachment figures in his life. Agency detection, hyperactive agency detection. Now, right now, if we hear a loud noise, everybody in this room is going to startle. Thank you. Yeah. And we will assume it was human agency until proven otherwise, and it was. So we have these hyperactive agency detection mechanisms that are biased towards human agency. That's why we will joke and we'll say, it rained today because I didn't bring my umbrella, or something like that. But we have these hyperactive agency detection mechanisms. The idea that something bad happens just on its own is not the default assumption. So the idea of supernatural powers that are agents just fits in immediately with our psychology. When you look at this, you see a square, but there are no lines. It's called inferential reasoning. You fill in the blanks. You just assume stuff that is there, even though it's not explicit. Why is this important? This goes into the mechanism that's probably one of the most crucial in religious cognition, minimally counterintuitive worlds. If I tell you this tree that is down near the port will do your taxes, fix your computer, register for classes, email your mother, you're simply not going to believe me because there's too many violations of treeness. But if I tell you this tree on the night of the full moon will answer one wish with regards to your daughter, well, maybe not this audience, but most of us are going to be a little bit vulnerable to believe that because there's one slight twist, but everything else about treeness is left there. There's only one slight, minimally counterintuitive twist with a human piece to it, but everything else about treeness is left intact. And this is what is known as minimally counterintuitive worlds. It's the optimum compromise between the expectable and the interesting. And all religious ideas are based on this. This is one of the fundamental pieces of it. You've heard that religions are fairy tales, and it's usually said in a pejorative way. I want you to discard that. Religions are fairy tales, but they're fairy tales in the genuine sense of fairy tales. What's the most popular movie ever? The Wizard of Oz. Everybody seen The Wizard of Oz? I'm showing my age here, probably. Okay. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But the Wizard of Oz All religious ideas are these minimally counterintuitive worlds that solve existential dilemmas. That's the nature of fairy tales. The Wizard of Oz. What is the Wizard of Oz about? It's the existential dilemma of adolescence and young adulthood. In growing up, our anxieties. Will we be brave enough? Will we be kind enough? Will we be smart enough? And how will we deal with the inevitable discovery that our parents are not the powerful wizards of our childhood, but that are ordinary mortals with all their flaws? And that's what the Wizard of Oz is about. And there are a few little magical twists that make it memorable, but it's basically that story. And take any religious idea, and you will find this. You will find a counterintuitive physical property. Okay, the Judeo-Christian God is everywhere, but everything else about surly old men is left intact. There's counterintuitive biologies. The Virgin Mary. Now, there's a little twist, a virgin birth, but everything else you know and think about and understand about young women is left intact. There can be a counterintuitive psychology. God knows, the Judeo-Christian God knows my thoughts. He knows if I've been naughty or nice. He knows if I've lusted in my heart. But, if so, why do I still have to talk to him? Ordinary human conversation, prayer. Because everything else about a human mind is left intact. We don't even question that he can understand my Southern accented English. So this is the key, or this is one of the bases of all religious ideas, minimally counterintuitive worlds, the same structure as fairy tales. And if you're interested in one of the best essays that refutes intelligent design, it's not a modern essay. It's Shelley's essay in 1814. Now, we are often told that if we didn't have religion, we wouldn't be moral. That is simply not true. And the reason that religions can get away with that is because our moral inferential systems are part of our hardwiring. They're evolved part of our systems that operate automatically and unconsciously. And they are exquisitely social. Our moral systems are very social and very tied into what our allies will think, our allies and enemies will think. Some of them, not all of them. And our moral inferential systems fall along these domains. And if you think about it, these would be the domains crucial for group living, and particularly group living in small bands. And every one of us, when we hear about, say, the Catholic priests sexually abusing children, you automatically have a reaction. You don't need to learn that that's immoral behavior, because it automatically, at an emotional level, violates almost all of these domains. So you just instantly know it. You don't have to be taught that to know that that is awful, unforgivable behavior. If you're interested in this, I would highly recommend Steve Pinker's essay in the New York Times Magazine, The Moral Instinct. He lays out the recent research on this. It's a wonderful article. Even more enjoyable, look at Paul Bloom's article, also in the New York Times Magazine, called The Moral Life of Babies. And if you're interested in child developmental psychology, his work and his wife's work, Karen Wynn, you will love. It is absolutely brilliant. And they show in 3 to 6 month old children, you start to see these moral inferential systems. It's just beautiful research. And these young babies in their mother's arms can make clear distinctions between a helping puppet, a helping agent, who they've not interacted with. They're just watching scenes. They can make distinctions between and orient towards a helping puppet. They can move away from a hindering puppet, an aggressive puppet. You say, well, what's so interesting about that? They can make the distinction between aggression done for a bad act and aggression done to punish a hinderer. It's just beautiful research. But basically what they're showing is they're showing these evolved moral inferential systems already starting to come online in 3- and 6-month-old infants. Just magnificent research, and it's summarized in Bloom's article. So again, our moral systems operate unconsciously, automatically, emotionally. They're part of the evolved architecture of our mind. Other animals have moral systems. Look at the book, if you're interested in the subject, Wild Justice, about the moral systems in some of our close mammalian primate cousins. And just beautiful work. But never again let anybody tell you that we wouldn't be moral unless we had religion. Religion can hijack it because we are largely unconscious of our moral systems. Now, we have a hard time at times explaining why we feel morally about certain things. Now, intentionality. Can you all read the cartoon captions? And this is again something we take for granted. And if you break it down, it sounds kind of awkward. But like first order would be, I hope. Second order would be, I hope you like this talk. Third order would be, he knows, I hope you would like this talk. Fourth order would be, they know, he knows, I hope you would like this talk. When you break it down, it sounds very awkward, but it operates seamlessly and automatically and is crucial for social relationships. And we just take it for granted, and again, don't realize what extraordinary mechanisms these are, and religion utilizes these. I believe God wants. I believe God wants us to act with righteous intent. And social religion, I want you to believe that God wants us to act with righteous intent. So again, religion's utilizing everyday, ordinary social cognition. Now, this is here for the following reason. The woman in the middle is a Concise mother. She's just given birth to this child. Her mother is on her left, and she is giving her baby to a female relative. And we are cooperative breeders. You would never see this in a chimpanzee or a bonobo or a gorilla. We are cooperative breeders. And this put huge selection pressure on infants to start to read what other caretakers are thinking or feeling. And this may be the basic selection pressure that led to one of the real extraordinary pieces of our minds, theory of mind mechanisms. If you're interested in this, Sarah Hurdy's book, Mothers and Others, she lays out the argument. It's an award-winning book. It's beautiful. You'd certainly enjoy it. And she makes the argument that this is the origin of our theory of mind mechanisms. And it's a clunky word for the idea that if I'm looking at Sheila's face right now, I can quickly come up with theories of what's going on in her mind, even though I don't see her mind. I have mechanisms that are operating that start to give me clues. Look at this picture here. Bogart's eyes are looking this way. Everybody see that? His eyes are looking left. Look at this picture here, and your brain will initially tell you Bogart's eyes are looking this way. Even though it's exactly the same picture, this is just a negative. But what I'm trying to do is tease out and show you, you can catch it just for a second, you have separate dedicated mechanisms that measure eye gaze. And it's a way of starting to get at what the person's intention is. Now, just look at this. What is this person feeling? Anybody? Use your gut. What's this person feeling?
Uneasy.
Uneasy? How many think it's uneasy? All right. What about this? Playful? How many thought it was playful? Okay. That's right. Now, step back and think about it for a minute. You just saw black and white photos, grainy black and white photos of just eyes. And you made an accurate judgment about a sophisticated emotional state. You can accurately read, just on eye gaze, about 212 different emotions, just on eye gaze. And you do it automatically and unconsciously. And guess what? Women are a little bit better at it than men. And defects in this are what characterizes autism and Asperger's, deficient theory of mind mechanisms. And Steve Pinker thinks that religion is basically theory of mind mechanisms run amok. And if theory of mind is so crucial to religion, then people with Asperger's and autism should have trouble with religious belief. It was a brilliant insight. I don't remember the researcher's name. And they went and looked at Asperger's and autistic individuals, and guess what? They're not religious. Very low rates of religion. And one of the most poignant examples of it you see, and how many of you are familiar with Temple Grandin? Probably the most well-known Asperger's autistic individual in the United States. And she talks about how she tried to be religious, and she just couldn't do it. Again, it's the deficient theory of mind mechanisms, because you need to think about what God intends, desires, wants for you and your life. Jesse Baring's book, The Belief Instinct, worth getting. Also his research, he's a brilliant psychologist, and he has a beautiful experiment in which he takes children and tells them it's just a puppet show, and has a crocodile eat a mouse. And then he asks them questions. Is the mouse still hungry? And the child says, no. Does the mouse still drink water? No. Is the mouse still thirsty? No. Does the mouse miss its mother? Yes. Is the mouse still angry at its brother? Well, probably. And so you see the persistence of mental states. They understand some about the concept of physical death, and guess what? Children in religious schools, this lasts longer than children in public and secular schools. It starts to fade in the childhood, beginning of adolescence. And the idea here is that these theory of mind mechanisms never really shut off, or it's very hard for them to shut off. That's why people plan their funerals. At some level, they think they're going to be present. And all of this really cannot conceive of our own death, because it's very hard to think of minds shutting off. And this is why, one of the reasons when somebody dies, it is so exquisitely painful, because there's a conflict. There's a terrible conflict, because part of you, your natural kind modules, see that the body is dead. But your theory of mind mechanisms are still going on. You can't believe that that person is not there. And that's what a lot of acute grief is the conflict between theory of mind, the person is still alive, natural kind modules that are saying, no, the person's dead. And that's part of the pain of grief. But that's also why religions solve that issue very easily, because souls, minds, easily in our minds live on. Very hard to extinguish them. And all these mechanisms you can see most clearly in children. Another book to look at, Justin Barrett's work, Born Believers, that we are basically natural and supernaturalists. Now, I've given you some sense of the mechanisms. Let me just give you a taste of the evidence before we move on to finishing up on religious ritual. This was a study done at NIH, Campigianis, during the Bush administration, and there have been a lot of imaging studies done of people who are outliers, monks, nuns. This was the first study just looking at ordinary believers and non-believers, and it's worth looking at. It's online at PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And what they showed was there were no particular religious networks. That these scans showed that when people thought about religion or engaged religious beliefs and in their cognitive system, it was with these social cognitive mechanisms, these theory of mind mechanisms primarily, and again, it's the first really good imaging evidence we have supporting this byproduct notion of religion. Many of you are familiar, I think, probably with Sam Harris's work, The End of Faith, The Letter to a Christian Nation. You may not be aware that he's also a neuroscientist with two very important MRI studies about belief. And what he has shown is that belief is sort of the default setting of our mind. We will quickly believe things.
And religious beliefs in particular are in our self-representation. Religious beliefs are part of our identity. That's part of why it's hard to give up. It is in that same area of our brain as our identity. It's also in the emotional parts of our brain. It's also in the systems of our brain that have to do with reward and goal-directed behavior. And it's content independent. So if the same area, if you're strongly believe, for instance, that Obama should be elected, that belief is going to be in the same part of the same area of your brain as religious belief. To disbelieve something, it's much harder. You have to engage other parts of your brain that are involved in disgust, in doubt, and its disbelief is much harder and uses different neural networks. But part of the reason you're never going to argue somebody out of their religious beliefs is you're going at their identity, at their attachment system. You're going at their identity, you're going at their mother. Okay? And that's why when most people leave religious belief, it's after quiet thought and struggle on their own. Epley's study is a fascinating one, and if you think about what God's attitudes are towards a certain issue, I just assumed it would use the same parts of my brain that had to do if I was trying to think about what's going on in his mind. If I'm trying to think about what God's attitudes are, I assumed that it would be the parts of my brain if I'm thinking about what's going on in his mind. Well, interestingly enough, when I think about his attitude, say about gay marriage, a part of my brain lights up. But when I think about God's attitude towards gay marriage, the part of the brain that lights up is the same part of the brain that has to do with my attitude about gay marriage. And it's really an article worth looking at, because when they manipulated people's beliefs, God's belief changed in the same direction. So it's beautiful imaging studies that show that our notion about what God thinks is just a pure projection about what we think and believe. Utterly fascinating research. So, those are the cognitive mechanisms. Those there's just some of the evidence. Now I want to finish up the area of religious ritual, the neurobiology of religious ritual. This is one of the crucial mechanisms. And again, we were horrified by some of this stuff. This is an illustration of what is called hard to fake, honest, costly signals of commitment. Hard to fake, costly, honest signals of commitment. And this are extreme examples of it, but when we evolved language, we evolved the ability to lie. And so how do I show you that I'm really mean what I say? If I tell Sheila that I love her and I want to marry her, why in the hell would she believe me? Okay? Really? Okay, well, she might be willing to believe me if I came up with a very expensive diamond ring. And I threw it at her. Yeah! Right? That is a hard to fake, costly, honest signal of commitment. And we do it all the time when we go out of our way to show up at something, at an event that's important to somebody. Right? And that again, we use it in everyday life, and this is crucial to religion and religious belief. This is basically what kosher is. You know, hard to fake, costly, honest signals of commitment to the faith. Now, if you look at Nicholas Wade's book, The Faith Instinct, which I would encourage you, the science correspondent for the New York Times, he makes a fabulous case for the following: that if you look at the Concise in Africa and the Andaman Islanders, who are, here you see D, and the Australian Aborigines, these are the three populations that are closest to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, the original population in Africa. Thomson in Africa, the Andaman Islanders, and the Aborigines. These are the closest populations to the original Homo sapiens population that left Africa 50,000 years ago. If you look at those groups, their religions are identical. And their religions are built around song, dance, and trance, but particularly song and dance. And why? This is a Concise religious ritual. The Aborigines. Notice the closeness, the touching, the symmetrical, rhythmic movement. In the first religions, they were equal. It was a community level. It reduced hierarchies, and it was centered on that. And what we're going to do right now is I'm going to sort of break that down, and by starting with the neurotransmitters. Serotonin, crucial for self-esteem, outward focus. Dopamine, we think of dopamine as the pleasure neuron. When you have intense pleasure, dopamine centers in your brain light up. But dopamine is also crucial for memory, focus, attention. When you mark something as important, you mark it with dopamine. Oxytocin. When a woman gives birth, huge release of oxytocin. When we have an orgasm, oxytocin. When a woman starts nursing, massive releases of oxytocin. Oxytocin increases bonding and trust, the attachment system. There's also trusting feelings. Endorphins. Endorphins are our internal morphine, endogenous morphine. And endorphins help block pain, but endorphins are also crucial for trust, feelings of trust. These are the crucial neurotransmitters. I suspect there are more. When you exercise, you are boosting dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, all of it. When you are exercising, you're getting massive pouring out of those neurotransmitters. Now, I'm going to break it down. We're going to sort of tease this apart, but keep in mind, again, all these come together. And we're going to start with music. There's a debate about whether music is an adaptation or a byproduct. People like Jeff Miller and Charles Darwin think it's an adaptation. Steve Pinker, some others think it's a byproduct of hard vowels and consonants and rhythm. Put that argument aside. It really doesn't matter. Because the bottom line is that music is a very powerful brain stimulator. And if we play music and give you naloxone, which blocks opioid receptors, you lose the pleasure of music. Oh. And so it seems that one of the main neurotransmitters that music stimulates are the endorphins. Again, pleasure, trust, bonding. This is what music does. And if you're interested in music, Leviton's book, well worth your time. Now, rituals are symmetric movement, rhythmic symmetric movement. If I take this room and randomly divide you into two groups, ask one group just to walk around the building twice and then come in, ask the other group to walk around the building in lockstep. Not fast, just lockstep. And then you come back in the building, and I give each group the same economic trust game. The group that had walked in lockstep will do better. And that's how, without rhythmic, without a lot of muscular movement. Just the rhythmic, symmetrical movement in coordination you'll have enhanced trust just on that synchronous movement, just the synchrony alone. Then there's this experiment done by Dunbar and some people in England who took some rowers and put them on ergometers. And they would put them on ergometers by themselves, and then they would put them together in a line. And so you could control for work output. And those that rowed together, their pain thresholds were massively elevated, so they didn't feel pain as soon or as much, even though there was the same output. And so you see synchronous movement, muscular activity, as a group, much greater than individually. Now touch. And here's where it also gets very interesting. And And Sheila kindly volunteered for this. If I just come over and put my hand on Sheila's shoulder and just rub it, and we've already met, so I'm not a stranger too much, but if I'm a close friend and just touch her shoulder, she gets an outpouring of oxytocin and endorphins, and her frontal lobes relax and she can concentrate better. Even more interesting, if I put Sheila in an MRI machine and I show her a threat scenario, her amygdala, the fear centers of her brain, light up. If I do that and I ask her to hold a stranger's hand, right, and unless right now I'm a stranger, her amygdala still lights up, but it lights up even less. Now, if I have her in an MRI machine, show her a threat scenario, and she's holding the hand of her partner or somebody that she's close to, her amygdala barely lights up at all. And the degree to which it doesn't light up is proportional to her rating of the quality of that relationship. The better the quality of that relationship, the less the fear. Same threat scenario, and the only thing that's going on is touch. Touch is extraordinarily powerful. And the grooming like this is ancient. Again, it releases endorphins and oxytocin. There's a phenomenal study that some people did, and they watched God knows how many hours of basketball films, and the teams that touch the most do the best. And I'm a real Celtics fan, and guess what? The year the Celtics won the championship, they were touching more than anybody else. Not only that, Kevin Garnett, when he would shoot a foul shot, within less than a second, he reached out and touched every one of his teammates. That's how powerful it is. How many of you saw Clinton's speech at the convention? Do you remember when Clinton finished his speech and the president walked on the stage? Everybody remember that? And if you remember, Clinton sort of bowed to Obama, an act really of submission, and then Obama comes over and hugs him and starts rubbing his back. Look at the New Yorker article that came out that week. These two men have been at war with each other and really disliked each other intensely. And it took a lot of people over a year's time getting them to reconcile. And they reconciled in 2012. The New Yorker article is absolutely fascinating. And when you saw this at the convention, and Obama is hugging Clinton and rubbing his back, not only both men are getting huge outpourings of oxytocin and endorphin and enhancing their trust, our mirror neurons are going off, and we're feeling the same thing. When I saw that, I saw myself tearing up. And that's because my mirror neurons were reacting the same way as if the president was hugging me and rubbing my back. My mirror neurons just going. And how many of you saw that? I'm just curious. And do you remember being a little bit moved by it? Okay. Now, so the early religions are based on this. This is the basis of early religions. And what I'd like to do now is just to illustrate this a little bit. If you'll bear with me, I'd like to do something. Anybody got a birthday today? Anybody got a birthday this week? Anybody got a birthday this month? Would you mind volunteering coming up? Birthday, man. Bear with me.
Oh, what's up?
Okay. And you are Matt, okay? And Lauren. Lauren. All right. Lauren. Now, what I'd like you to do, Lauren and Matt, what I'd like you to do is just bear with me. What I'd like you to do is just think about how you're feeling. Just sort of do a gut check and think about how you're feeling. Now, I'd like you to think about somebody you're in conflict with, intense conflict with. Really, things are not good right now. And think about that person and how you're feeling. Now, third thing, and the last thing, I'd like like you to take the skin on the back of your hand and pinch it as hard as you can. Really find the pain threshold. I want you to make it hurt. Find that pain threshold. Now, bear with me. I'm going to ask you to be a little self-conscious here. What I'm going to ask people to do is stand, and we're going to link arms, and we're going to start swaying, and we're going to belt out 2 verses of Happy Birthday. On the mat.
Do it. I'm hyped for this shit. Let's go.
Just bear with me. Let's get together. Let's Everybody got somebody? Alright. Mark down. Let's start swaying. Let's get a good sway going. Let's get the sway going. Alright, everybody swaying well? Yeah. Now let's go. We're going to start with a happy birthday to Matt, belt it out, and we'll do a happy birthday to Lauren. All right? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Matt. Happy birthday to you. All right, belt it out for Lauren. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Lauren. Happy birthday to you. Yeah, here's
Good.
Thank you for your indulgence. All right, we're going to do it in reverse order. Find your pain threshold.
Ow.
Hurts worse.
Anybody notice it a little bit harder to find?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, be a good skeptic here. You know, we don't have a control group, so, but just get that pain threshold. Now, think about the person you were in conflict with and how you feeling about it. Anybody notice? Okay, but think. I mean, anybody notice even a little change?
No.
All right, now just think about how you're feeling. You put your embarrassment aside, just think about your basic feelings. Anybody notice any shift at all? Hopefully a little bit. All right. Now, I just made you exquisitely embarrassed, gave you only a couple of minutes at most of synchronous movement, of touch, and of music. The original religions of our hunter-gatherer ancestors went for 8 and 12 hours through the night. Imagine if you did what we did, the equivalent for 8 to 12 hours, and what that would do internally. And this was the original. This was the original religion, probably, of our ancestors. And rituals were probably crucial. The religion's origin is in group living. And the original religions probably help groups deal with any number of issues. Courtship, and the original Saturday square dance. The biggest problem in group living, freeloaders. Okay? How do you tell somebody who is really committed to the group versus somebody who's just trying to get the group's benefits without paying for it? Punishment, commitment, easing communal conflict, preparing for war. Think about the parallels with what we did here with, say, soldiers, but also think about the parallels with a carnival or music or concerts that we all go to. The reason that this is important is that when you see something like this, I want you to think differently. I want you to see this as a synchronous dance between men who are bonding. That's what this is. And if you look at any of today's modern religions, you will see echoes of this original religion of our ancestors. Even Buddhism. Think of the men in front of the Wailing Wall, the synchronous movement, the close proximity, touching. And we saw this before. How many of you know why pews are in Christian churches? Anybody know why they're there? Why they went into Christian churches in the 16th century?
Get close.
No, to stop the dancing. Dancing was part of it, and as soon as political power became more entrenched with religion and hierarchies were built, they stopped the dancing, the social leveling of religion, and the dancing, obviously it hasn't been extinguished completely in some Pentecostal churches, particularly African American churches, and the dancing moved outside, carnival. But pews were in churches, pews have their origin in churches for the dancing. But again, if you look at any of the modern religions, in their rituals, you will see the echoes of the original religion of our ancestors. So, let me finish up. And for those of you who can't read this, it says, I wish you would make up your mind, Mr. Dickens, was it the best of times or was it the worst of times? It could scarcely have been both. And actually, I think we should agree with Mr. Dickens. I think it is the worst of times, and it is also the best of times. It is the worst of times in that all you have to do is pick up a newspaper or watch the news and see how religion still poisons our politics, oppresses half the human race, women, retards science, particularly medical science, and the limitless possibilities of stem cell research, and how religion probably stands as the single greatest barrier to a global civil society in the 21st century. So I think it's the worst of times. Yet, I also think it is the best of times. And why? Because if I have done my work well, I have shown you, I hope, that you, particularly the young people, are the first generation in history of the world who know and are moving into adult life positions of responsibility. The first generation in the history of the world that knows how and why human minds create and consume religious beliefs. And that leaves us with three challenges. What am I going to do with this knowledge? What are you going to do with this knowledge? And what are we, as a scientifically literate society in the 21st century, going to do with this knowledge for future generations? Thank you very much.
Dr. Thomson is going to do a Q&A session real quick. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask him. We're also going to be selling copies of his book, Why We Believe in God. They're $10 a piece. Apparently there's a chamber choir going out in the hallway, so they've taken up all the tables. So once we're all done, if you want to just line up right down here, and we'll just sign right on stage. I know it sounds kind of, yeah. So, and I think that's it. So if anyone has any questions, Lauren?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been in. Grew up Catholic, a long time since I've been to Mass, but there is still ritual in that you know, as I recall, there's regular pattern to the ceremony, and you can stand up, sit down, stand up, kneel down. So there's how does that factor into maybe some dances moved out of the church, but
No, the dance itself, no, that's a very good point. Dance, open dance was moved out of the church, but what you're describing is still present, and I would argue still stimulates those same things. There's synchrony, there's physical movement, there's touch, close to people. Everybody comes up and kneels, it's close together, there's touch. And in a lot of services now, you have to turn and shake hands with, or touch the person next to you. And the up and down, absolutely, those elements are still there. So yes, those are there, and I hope I've shown you they impact your brain. Over here for Matt, and then here.
The one point that I was curious about, you had the slide that mentioned warfare, prepared for warfare with this, but that seems counterintuitive. The rest seem to be how to get along with the warfare would be just the opposite. I don't understand.
No. It would be preparing our group for warfare. If you and I are in the same tribe, the night before we go out to battle, we would probably go through one of these rituals, and it would enhance our bonding, our commitment to the group. If I'm there and I'm going through the ritual, it's your way of seeing a hard-to-fake, honest, costly signal of commitment. I'm committed to the group. You and I are doing things together. It's stimulating those neurotransmitters that have to do with bonding. And the difference between men and women is that men have the capacity ingrained in us for what's called male-bonded coalitionary violence and lethal raping. We have dedicated mechanisms to that women don't have. And that could stick with it. I think this
This was back to the dancing. If dancing enhances the religious experience, why do they take it out of the church?
That's a good question. If you it's a wonderful book called if you come up to me afterwards, I'll give you the reference. But there's a book about dance, and it's in there. It's in two different books, but my memory is that it had to do with when political power became much more entwined with religion, and the political hierarchies and religions, and the political hierarchy and religious hierarchies got together. They needed to control the congregations because the original religious rituals leveled social hierarchy, and dancing would level social hierarchy, and they had to try to get rid of that. Is my memory. But if you'll come up to me afterwards, I'll give you the reference for the book on dance. That's in almost the whole book is great. Yes.
I'm a registered nurse. I have seen miracles in the hospital. How do you explain miracles other than coincidental or not reading the x-ray correctly? I have seen miracles.
Well, obviously, I would disagree. I think you were there, you saw them, I didn't, but I think there's a materialistic explanation for it. I mean, there's evidence there. Whatever you saw happen happened, particularly with medicine and regression to the mean. There's a lot of stuff on that. If you investigate it carefully, you're more likely to find physiologic explanation. But we're all vulnerable to think miracle, agency of a supernatural being. I mean, that's our bias. But I appreciate that. Disagree with you.
Who am I to say that I understand all this and there isn't someone, a higher spiritual being?
An educated individual in the 21st century.
Okay.
Wow.
Thanks.
Quick question. Usually in discussing with religious devotees, they say that they'll have a spiritual experience or enlightenment when they're like alone praying in a chapel or something like that. But out of curiosity, just because it doesn't seem to fit into any of the points that we made previously, is there any insight of what might have happened within the brain that gave them this enlightenment or this rebirth or anything of that nature, that brain does?
I think you have to look at that particular individual. What is their history? What is going on in their life at the time that they have this? What kind of stresses are they under? What are the conflicts in their life? And what's going on? I think you'll come up with an explanation that's not so much general, but that has to do with the individual exigencies of that particular person's life.
So a little more psychoanalytical to that person.
What's going on with it at that time, at that point in their life? I mean, you see that particularly in Collins, the guy that runs the NIH and wrote that book, and he became a born-again Christian. And talks about having a conversion experience by a waterfall, and he just wondered what was going on in his life at the time. And you can piece together some things that in his book that indicate that there were personal things going on in his life of great pain.
The last bit that you said about what should we do about it? You know, you said all these things about religion and all that. But I was thinking that even though the religions of the world, like the Muslims and the Christians, all sorts of denominations, and then like how we have nuclear weapons now, we can kill each other. if we do, and then the whole planet gets wiped out, and the human race goes away, right? And then all our knowledge, cumulative knowledge is gone. We'll just, I mean, the universe doesn't really need us. Like, I mean, we can just like go away for like ever. And then we just, like, I mean, nothing happened, like, you know? Because the universe is out there. When you see outside the universe, it's like vast, expansive universe, and it's just nothing really. And then we're just like, we're looking for other UFOs or other whatever. But if we get wiped out, we kill each other off because of our religion. I mean, there's no difference really. So, I mean, well, we can.
This part of the universe would like to stick around.
But I mean, you know, like, yeah. If religion somehow takes over the world and everyone just like, because of religion, starts killing each other off. Because like, I mean, we can't really agree on each other's religion, and then you know, humanity just has to perish. So what, you know?
I think it would be a tragedy.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. In the back.
Can you, I know you can't tell the future, but can you approximate when it would be safe for a politician to declare that they're atheists and expect to make some kind of place for themselves in high office?
I don't. Did everybody hear the question? We've already had atheist president. Jefferson probably was. I think Lincoln probably was. His best friend Herman said he was. I actually think President Obama is.
Yeah.
I think so
There's
too.
evidence for it, but he obviously can't do it politically, and I don't think he could do it in his family. I think Michelle is very religious, and so but I think Obama. If the people here read his father was called. Dreams of my father. Thank you. Yeah, I think. But when can somebody do it openly?
Openly,
When
yes.
can somebody do it openly? I don't think it will be as. All I can say is I don't think it will be as soon as I would like, but I don't think it will be as far away as I fear. We'll reach a tipping point and then it'll be acceptable.
There is
Yeah, there's one openly start, and my understanding is they redesigned his district and he may lose this year. Yes, ma'am.
I found the New York Times magazine article interesting recently about the Louisiana preacher down in Louisiana. Did you read that? I don't remember the guy's name, but he was talking about taking atheism and humanism out of the ivory towers and out of the more of the intellectual academia world into the real Bible Belt down in Louisiana and was it Arkansas? I can't remember the exact where it was geographically, but it was in the deep South, and he was ostracized from his family, and he was a preacher, and started reading Hitchens and Dawkins, and started kind of coming out of that world and preaching more of the atheist and aspects. And how, I guess my question to you is, does your line of work take you into that world more? Or are you mainly in UVA and the Northeast? And
No, I try. I mean, I've been invited to Sunday school classes to teach this stuff, and so and they're liberal churches, obviously. But no, you're thinking about Jerry. I'm blocking his last name. Jerry, and I actually met him. He's an extraordinary man, and as was said, I'm one of the trustees of the Dawkins Foundation, and one of the projects we did is called the Clergy Project, and that allowed Jerry and some of the others to come out. And what is fascinating is that there are large numbers of clergy who are atheists, who are preaching and they still have congregations because it's the only way they can earn a living.
Right.
And oftentimes their families are still quite religious. And they have lived in isolation and in torment. And we set up this project that created a secure website where these people, men and women, who were ministers, many of them Baptist ministers, who were atheists because they had been reading, and they got together and they started talking to each other and supporting each other. And you're starting to see them come out. And Jerry was one of them, and there's a couple others. Teresa McBain, they're very public, and they pay dearly for it with their families. I'm also I spend most of my time as a practicing psychiatrist. I have ministers in my practice who are in that position, and it's very painful for them. But that's what's fascinating is you have in very religious congregations ministers who are atheists, and they're still trying to go through the motion of managing congregations. And I think that's going to become more open. And if you're interested in this, the person that runs it is, if you Google Clergy Project, but Linda, I'll get the name of it.
But it's the Dawkins Foundation.
No, but the actual person that is researching this all started with a woman in Washington, D.C., a psychologist, Linda and she started researching these people. And she got together with Dan Dennett, and they started interviewing these people anonymously. And it's just a fascinating work psychologically, the degree to which these individuals suffer. But now it's turning into, you're going to see it, as the New York Times article indicated, a little bit more of a social movement. And these people are used to talking to congregations. There are a lot of them from poor backgrounds. They can go into the Bible Belt. And they've got the credibility, with those audiences because they were ministers. Linda Lascala, if you look that up, it'll come up. And ABC News did something on her work. And some of her work is actually published online. Will?
You talked a little bit about religion as a signal of commitment. Do you think sexual selection plays any role in this, and that mates would only select people that gave off that signal? So if you were religious, you were more likely to be a committed mate.
Yeah.
So people would only marry people like demonstrated religiosity.
No, I think religion it's not a sexually selected trait per se, but religion is a way of signaling that you're a committed individual, you commit to a group, you have the capacity for commitment. Yes, and that's why. Again, if you look at Jeff Miller's work, the mating mind. And I think it's in there. And the original religion was probably in part courtship display. Absolutely. For males, that women are looking at, and it's a way for women to make assessments of the quality of potential mates. Absolutely.
How does this knowledge come into play in your practice as a psychiatrist?
That's a good question. I think I've had some patients refer to me who are these ministers who are atheists and still have congregations. I think that's one. I don't know how much the nature of my practice is really quite psychiatrically ill individuals, and this work in particular probably doesn't affect it that much because it's dealing with other things. But I think that's the one area where I think I've had a couple of referrals based on this, of these ministers. Was there? I'm curious what the question or what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I guess because I want to be a psychiatrist, and yeah, I'm just curious if you have religious patients, ever, and if they're, especially if they're having issues related to religion, but they're not necessarily looking to leave religion, but maybe.
No, I actually, interestingly, I've had a couple of ministers in my practice who don't know anything about this. And they don't know anything, they don't know, and I'm just seeing them absolutely, strictly just for their psychiatric problems, and they're still very active, deeply religious ministers. And at times, I don't bring it up. have to stay, you can't let your own personal stuff in. Now with these ministers, I will admit, at moments a little disappointing. Because I think, obviously my book hasn't gotten out. Thing there and then,
Yeah, it seems to me what you're saying is religion fills almost a biological, psychological need. If the answer is, well, religion is just filling that need, what do you, and someone comes to you and starts to recognize religion is what they believe is not real, what do you do to help them to replace that need? What fulfills that for them?
I haven't had that in my practice per se. I mean, nobody's come in other than these ministers, a couple of these ministers. I've not had that in my practice. In terms of other individuals, I think it gets down to that particular person's life. That individual, who they are as a person. I mean, what part religion played in their life, in their family's life, when they become, if they lose their religion, how it's going to impact their relationships. I think it's I think that issue is a highly individualized story. I think as a society, I think what's interesting is that you see Europe became less and less religious after World War II, long before this knowledge. And one of the ideas that's out there is that was because of the social safety net that was created in Europe after World War II. And that's the explanation for the fall off of religiosity in Europe, is you had a tremendous social safety net.
You mean socialism?
No, just a social safety net. Universal health care, good unemployment, welfare, housing, food. That when you create a social safety net, that religion loses a lot of its power. For instance, Hamas is very popular, in part because Hamas delivers tremendous social services in the area that it's in. Medicine, food, money. I mean, do you know what the greatest, do you know the organization that's the largest non-governmental supply of social services in this country? You want to guess?
Catholic Church?
No, Mormon Church. Okay, and that's part of why the religious right is opposed to big government, because they're in competition. Okay, so I think the more social safety net you see is what leads to the fall off of religion, not necessarily this knowledge, though obviously I hope this knowledge helps.
Yeah. You're wondering how this might fit into practice. Would it help them to understand they were feeling guilty, why they were believing in the first place? This was given some reason for why they don't how we came together.
Yeah, I wouldn't have anybody feel guilty about why they believe in the first place, because it's almost impossible not to believe.
But if they were feeling that way, if they were feeling that way,
well, that's if I understand your idea, that you would help people feel to reduce guilt. I mean, you don't want anybody feeling guilty about having been a religious believer, because we're so vulnerable to it. It's hard not to. That's the meaning of all this research, is that we're natural born supernatural.
So it's easy, that's how work into a practice and help them understand.
Well, I think one of the interesting points that you didn't get to was childhood credulity. And also, when you leave the religion, I think I heard it, it depends where you are. Like for me, it wasn't an issue, but for some places, it's been described as social suicide, essentially. And that's why some people can't do it, because it's social suicide, especially when the religions are pushing ideas of like hell. And that encourages the family to try desperately not to let them leave when they have teachings of hell. And religions often, I wonder if religions have their own sort of selection, the ones that are better at retaining members and gaining members would be the last one. For example, the three major monotheistic religions have these, for one, they have like social pressures, and they have often like these people have to worry about their family desperately saying, you're going to go to hell if you do this. And also for being disowned. It's social suicide, especially further south. Up here, I mean, I know a lot. I have no problem with it, and some people don't, but others do.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Where I am, it's social suicide for a lot of people. Absolutely. No, and I live an hour from Jerry Falwell's, and I see in my practice, I see people who, I have seen people in my practice who, when they left, they became even a little bit secular. It was terribly painful, and their families literally and figuratively gave them help. Absolutely.
You mentioned social safety net and also the open lives of the young, which I agree. It seems to me the new social safety net is social media, because now we can join together without having to live next to each other. And it just seems like that might be the hope for our European, overcoming, like what Europe did, but our ability to overcome and have a find a new social net. So we agree on that.
Oh, absolutely. 2 points. Did everybody hear his question about the importance of social media? I guess I had 2 responses. The Clergy Project would not have happened without that, with the capacity for the internet and create a secure chat room via the internet for these people that can remain anonymous. Number 1. Number 2, you will hear ministers say that the greatest enemy of faith is the internet. Because it's powerful. Because you will hear people, you will hear. I've heard it. A 14-year-old kid can go on the internet and watch Hitchens debates. And how many of you have seen Hitchens debates? Yes. YouTube in general. But just point a 16-year-old to Hitchens debates. It's marvelous. And when I was growing up, you didn't have that.
Monkey Scopes trial? Monkey Scopes trial?
It
sounded like a joke.
That's interesting. The Scopes trial, no. The Scopes trial was fascinating because the Scopes trial was carried worldwide. After the Scopes trial was over, there was more evolution in textbooks in 1925 than when I went to high school in the 1960s. And it's because after the Scopes trial, the textbook makers decided, we don't want this to happen again. So evolution was basically removed from the textbooks. And it wasn't, the next court cases were not until the 1960s. But in the 1920s, there was a little bit more. But you also need to remember the Scopes trial. The argument was that science and religion could coexist. It was not the conflict between science and religion. And actually, the greatest speech in the Scopes trial, the academic freedom speech by Dudley Malone, was about the coexistence of science and science and religion. And you saw that in the Dover trial. Okay, the Dover trial was the opinion of Judge Jones was an otherwise great opinion about intelligent design being politics and creationism. But if you read Judge Jones's decision, he went along with the idea that there was no conflict between science and religion. And if I've done my work well, you know, and I think this audience knows, there's a massive conflict between science and religion, particularly the cognitive neurosciences of religion and these ancient beliefs.
What do you think it would take to replace religion in mainstream society?
In the United States?
In the United States and around the world.
In the United States, America.
I'm wondering if you think it needs to be replaced. That's the first question.
No, absolutely. I think the United States is anomalous. In Western European countries, in Australia, Norway, in countries that are westernized and have high levels of social safety nets and education, religion is just fading long before this knowledge is available. The United States is really strange in that we are this highly westernized, scientifically literate society, but have high religiosity. Why? I think it's an interesting question. I think it will fade because if you look at the surveys of people in their 20s, once you get into the population that's here, student population in their 20s, religious belief is just way down. And so I think you already see it seeping in. What I'm showing you here, all of what I'm showing you here is in mainstream psychology journals. So I think in 5 years, you're not going to be able to write a psychology 101 textbook that will be approved that doesn't have some of this in it. And so I think it's just a matter of reaching a tipping point. It won't happen in my lifetime, but I think it will happen in my grandchildren's lifetime. But your thoughts on that?
I hear the question of what do we replace religion with? And I don't accept the premise of that it needs to be replaced. I think we just need to get rid of it. If I went to the doctor and he said, you've got a cancerous tumor, we need to cut it out, I'm not going to ask him, well, what are you going to replace it with? And I think it's the same thing with religion. We can get rid of it without replacing it.
No, I think Western Europe shows us that. I've lost track of the order of the hands. There was some other hand that's up here.
I was going to say that it depends on the person. Some, like, for me, I have nothing to replace it with. I was just done, and that was it. And then some people try, they'll try, they leave their religion they were originally born in, and then they try another one, that doesn't work, they try another one, they try another one, or they try other supernatural stuff, I don't know, astral projection and stuff, and they'll try all that kinds of stuff instead too. And other people don't replace it at all. It depends on the person. Some people feel a need to replace it, and others just don't feel that need at all.
And there's interesting variation. We were talking about serotonin. There's fascinating research out there that you can correlate religiosity with the density of a particular serotonin receptor, type 1A receptor. The hour is late. Thank you very much for coming tonight.